Welcome to Blaze News, The Mandate, Day 39. I'm Jill Savage. Tonight on the agenda, President Trump had a phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin about a ceasefire in Ukraine. The two leaders agreed that movement towards peace will begin with an energy and infrastructure ceasefire, and it will also include negotiations on a maritime ceasefire, a complete ceasefire, and permanent peace. On Truth Social, Donald Trump called for the impeachment of crooked judges, including U.S. District Judge James Boasberg, for blocking his deportation plans. He wrote, "This judge, like many other crooked judges I am forced to appear before, should be impeached." Congressman Brandon Gill was quick to act on this call from Trump and introduced articles of impeachment against Judge Boasberg. Gill accused him of high crimes and misdemeanors that should remove him from the bench. Well, Donald Trump is now offering illegals the option to self-deport with a new app from the DHS, and he released this friendly PSA on X.
People in our country illegally can self-deport the easy way, or they can get deported the hard way, and that's not pleasant. The Biden administration exploited the CBP-1 app to allow more than 1 million aliens to illegally enter the United States. Now my administration is launching the CBP Home app to give people in our country illegally an easy way to leave now and self-deport voluntarily.
Vice President JD Vance delivered remarks at the American Dynamism Technical Conference, attempting to bridge the gap between populists and tech groups within the Republican Party. Vance took the opportunity to explain why the two sides have common ground on artificial intelligence.
Real innovation makes us more productive, but it also, I think, dignifies our workers. It boosts our standard of living. It strengthens our workforce and the relative value of its labor. And as Americans, all of us should be particularly proud of our extraordinary heritage. I think it is American heritage of inventing things.
Well, America's economy is making a comeback. Industrial production just hit an all-time high, and manufacturing output is at its strongest since October of 2022. Well, during his speech, Vance highlighted the economic wins in just 2 months of Trump's second term.
Which is why last month we posted 9,000 new auto jobs after many, many years of stagnation or even decline in the auto sector. It's why, just weeks in, we already have new plan of production announcements from Honda, from Hyundai, and Stellantis worth billions of dollars and thousands of additional jobs on top of the ones that were already created.
The Treasury Department has hired Gary Shapley and Joseph Ziegler, the IRS whistleblowers, in the case involving Hunter Biden's taxes. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent discussed this decision on Fox Business.
Seeing them in person really brought it home for me. So I went and decided I would bring them into Treasury, give them a year to investigate the wrongdoing that's going on at the IRS, and then they will go back in. Mr. Shapley will serve as the senior deputy for investigations and enforcement.
Well, all this news, let's go ahead and bring in Blaze News editor-in-chief Matthew Peterson. So I like that they're going out and actually rehiring some of these whistleblowers that have been so wrongly taken out by the wayside there.
This is something, right, that's absolutely necessary for justice and to bring things back. If we're so back, that means we have to bring back the people who have been unjustly persecuted. And, it goes for the FBI as well, right? Our friend, Steve Friend and others should get that opportunity. But this is a great sign that justice is being restored.
We look at the crooked judges. Donald Trump is out there making his case against the crooked judges. There's a lot of talk about impeachment. What's your take on this story?
So impeachment practically is really hard because Congress is really terrible. Because Congress is bad, impeachment is hard. It's not something that Congress as a whole has an appetite for. But for the first time, we are seeing the actual desire, the political will to make it happen, because this has been going on for decades, right? Conservatives have been complaining about this for decades for good reason. It's not just partisanship. It's the fact that judges have become political as they become leftists over the last 40 years. This goes back, by the way, to the 1960s and 70s and the Supreme Court getting involved into things that really just shouldn't have been involved in the first place. So they're used to doing this now. It's common political practice. And what you're seeing is a snapback because people are realizing how serious and stupid this is and how unconstitutional it is, frankly. And so, our friend, Gill, the congressman coming out and doing this and putting the articles out there. You've seen, Senator Mike Lee talk about it online. You've seen Elon Musk talk about it. Now you've seen, Trump talking about these crooked judges, and now you see a little toe in the water, right? We're actually going to start moving down this direction. I predict this is going to gain a lot of momentum because something has to be done to shut them up.
Well, there's more than just a toe in the water when it comes to immigration that we're seeing from Donald Trump. I love that he's just out there going, okay, well, here's a self-deport option, you guys, because we all know it's going to happen. So if you just want to make this easier on us, you might as well give them something to make everybody's lives a little easier. Yeah,
a friend, one thread I read today, I can't remember, he said, this is one of the greatest trolls Donald Trump has ever performed in his life. And it's more than a troll, right? It's saying, okay, you want an app to let people come in here illegally. Here's a way you can just get out and go and it's fine. And we'll let you go, but you gotta, you can't stay here. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. It's closing time. And when you see Trump do that, I mean, it is funny in a way, but underlying that is a real seriousness. This is real. You have to leave.
Well, I just love the fact that the government is coming out and going through and actually making things that us, the taxpayers, we, the citizens, are actually going to enjoy. It's not just being used against us every single time now.
Yeah, and that app is actually going to save money, right? I mean, I doubt that the Trump administration paid this much for it. This changing that thing, that's going to save the taxpayers a lot of money because increasingly as they actually deport people, a lot of people will self-deport, and that's ultimately what most people will do. And this makes it easy. So technology for the win.
Part of making America great again. Well, don't go anywhere. When we come back, Chris Bedford will be back in action to talk about how JD Vance's new unprecedented role is shaking things up. We'll have that just ahead. Well, yesterday was St. Patrick's Day, and our main man out in D.C., Chris Bedford, took the day off to celebrate, but he is back now. And first, we're going to make him unpack his day and tell us, Bedford, everything that you did yesterday and a little bit more on your recovery this morning.
It was a rough road this morning, a rocky road. I tell you, it turns out that I'm not quite as young as I used to be able to handle 3 real dinners in a row that culminate in St. Patrick's Day. So the day begins bright and early, obviously, top of the morning to you. And I drop the boy off at school around 7:30. I pick up a pal at 7:45. We're back at my place to drop off the vehicle around 8:20 with an Irish coffee. Now, the first pub in Old Town Alexandria to open on St. Patrick's Day is Murphy's Grand Irish Pub, which is not quite so grand, but it certainly does the trick. Opens up at 9 a.m. with breakfast and pints, and me and about 80 other retirees, it seemed like. We were in the first wave on the beaches. We went from there down to O'Connell's around 11. Each place, of course, had live music. Met up some more friends there, so now there was 4 in our group. Ended up going across the street for a quick bite and then swung by. It was a bit of a hall pass day for us older married men. So swung by for a bite at our favorite sports pub before I was back to O'Connell's. And then in an attempt to dig myself out of any trouble I'm probably already in with my family, I picked up their favorite pizza at Emmy Squared, had probably an ill-advised another cocktail there, and then went home to a big, happy St. Patrick's Day family before I woke up and for that early morning wake up, that early morning drop off in a pretty wretched state.
It's a rocky road to recovery as we get a little older. But I'm impressed and admire what you did. That's amazing. And I'm inspired, really. I'm going to have to ask for a pass next time. Looking forward to it.
I think you'll have to join us.
Did they actually have a proper breakfast?
Yes, the proper full Irish breakfast with tomatoes and the whole works.
Nice.
The beans were one of the most important aspects of getting you through that. And of course, nothing like the traditionally ethnically Irish meal of chips and curry, which of course is an important afternoon staple on a day like this.
Well, all right, let's get back to the business at hand. You are in D.C., and we're going to actually make you work a little bit today because we do see some big moves for MAGA out there right now. JD Vance is actually going to step in as the finance chair for the RNC. He's going to be the first VP to actually do this as the sitting vice president. So all of this is just to make sure that the America First agenda has the funding and the firepower that it needs. So what do you make of this move and just the future of the GOP and what this signals?
Gosh, it's smart. I mean, JD Vance is really remaking what you can do with a vice presidential role when you want to be, one, a really intelligent workhorse, who two, has the trust of your boss and the trust of the party. He could be a fundraising juggernaut. I think a lot of people look at him as someone who is has a large role to play in the future of the MAGA movement and the future of the Republican Party. So him stepping into this role, and remember, the finance chair is not the CFO. He's not going to be sitting in there with Excel spreadsheets in an office and a calculator trying to do the numbers. Finance chair is going to be someone who's really responsible for how the party does in raising money. The Republican Party has re-entered kind of an old era of big money involved with it, which can be a blessing, but it can also be a curse. Money completely dried up from mega donors in 2016 when Donald Trump got the nomination. Basically Sheldon Adelson and then his widow were among the only ones left, and even they had real pushback against some of the ideas of a less interventionist foreign policy. And they were, with that money, they were able to have, and that influence and that support, and of course the voters, they were able to have an impact, I think, on Trump's foreign policy toward Israel and other parts of the Middle East. Now, that has changed. You've got Google, you've got Amazon, you've got the corporations for the first time in 8 years putting money back into this party, and you need someone who's got a little bit of star power to get there. And it sets him up for a future. He's pretty new to this game. He was a 2-year senator when he became vice president. So getting up that fundraising chops is going to be essential to his future as well.
Yeah, that's what I'm fascinated by. It seems to fit. It solves a number of different problems, right? I mean, the new money is going to come in. Who's going to control that? It's going to stay part of the MAGA agenda and channel the MAGA agenda or not. The RNC, needs a lot of work. But then that last part you mentioned is what's most fascinating to me. I mean, where else would you rather be, right? If you are the heir apparent, than the guy a few years from now who can point to the fact that he's raised all this money and overseen the raising of this money for the RNC. I mean, it seems like that's almost like the missing piece, and solidifies his hold and almost accelerates, right? That solidifying his role, looking to the future.
And I think it's also important for the Republican National Committee in the first place. Now, I know that this is they raise a lot of money. I was close with the CFO for years. He's now down at the White House, right? So he's moved on from that position. But I've always asked him, I've always been kind of curious, where does this money come from? Mm-hmm. I understand people being really motivated to give money to different faces, to different candidates. They want to be small dollar donors or big dollar donors to people who make them excited. Donald Trump, for example, or if you lean more that way, maybe Kevin McCarthy back in the day, or whoever else. Mike Johnson is someone you want to donate to. That's a personality. It's a little bit harder to raise money for simply the Republican Party. The brand was in the toilet for years. It's an apparatus that doesn't have that actual personality that can persuade people and walk into a room. So to attach Vance to that party machine is extremely important and shows the remaking of the GOP at a pretty higher level.
Well, I want to ask you a question because we've been talking about the crooked judges, and Donald Trump has come out and said we need to get rid and impeach all of these crooked judges. And Daniel Horowitz, our guy, has written a piece for Blaze News saying if he actually wants to survive his presidency, Trump might need to defy these rogue judges. So what's your take on this? Because it is something that is just kind of in that news cycle, and it's not going away now.
I think they're going to have to do so rather carefully. I've got a piece coming out in the Beltway Brief tomorrow about how two of the biggest causes celebre of the Democratic Party right now are a plane full of tattooed, hard-looking gangbangers and a woman who attended the leader of Hezbollah's funeral when she was visiting Lebanon and is an admirer of the Ayatollah and the Hezbollah, quote, martyrs. These are not very good heroes, but they're hinging these sorts of things on judicial intervention and the fights between the White House and the judges. I think you probably caught Stephen Miller's really interesting and contentious interview with CNN over the weekend, or Monday, where he pushed back against these sorts of ideas. And what they're going to have to do is, opposed to saying you've got the authority and we ignore it, they're going to have to make a strong case that they have no authority. That a judge saying turn this airplane around infringes so much on the legislatively gifted executive power that it's not even worth responding to. It's the same as if I wrote a column saying I ordered this plane turned around. Hey, it might be well written, but it's not going to have any actual authority over the president's decisions here. They're going to have to thread that needle very carefully, because they don't have Amy Coney Barrett in the Supreme Court with them right now. And while traditionally the Chief Justice has been really deferential to executive power, he's been treading carefully. He hasn't gone in the direction that the Trump administration expected him to in earlier rulings. And he's a wild card that the Democrats seem to be betting on with this kind of wild overreach over executive power and the separation of branches. They seem to be relying on him as potentially their ace in the hole.
Well, Bedford, we know you have to run tonight, but we appreciate you putting in all of this effort to come back, even if you're not at 100%, because we know as we get older, that's a lot harder to do.
I've been laughing all day at Matt's comment that any nag can drink all night, but it takes a thoroughbred to get up again in the morning. And it's really motivated me, Matthew. So thank you.
All right, Bedford.
You're a professional.
We'll catch you tomorrow. But Matthew, before we go, I want to ask you, because I do see that we have comments from Chief Justice John Roberts today. He was issuing a statement saying that for more than 2 centuries, it's been established that impeachment is not only an appropriate response for the disagreement concerning the judicial decision, it's the normal appellate review process that exists for that purpose. And others, Mike Lee and others, are actually kind of shocked that Roberts would come out and make comments like this. Yeah,
so I think there's a couple things going on here. First off, I want to affirm what Chris said. I mean, in terms of why they have to be careful, right? So you have to be careful when you disobey the judge's orders because it matters a lot in the big picture. What is the judge saying about what thing the executive did? So if the executive is making a determination about national security, for instance, then going back, over 2 centuries in America, the president is at his max powers. And generally, the Supreme Court has only come back and said, you did a bad thing, you did an oopsie, for instance, during a war. It takes after the war. Like after the thing has already happened, the court will come in and sort of mop up, but they give maximum deference to the executive when he's at a maximum, the kind of maximum of his powers, which would be especially when it comes to war and defense. That's why they're in a pretty good situation here. I think that the being leery about impeachment, though, I mean, notice what he says. It's in here, right? Impeachment is not an appropriate response to disagreement concerning a judicial decision. Yeah, that's true. But the question is the manner in which the decision is made, right? And if there is a number of things that you could look to say when this becomes egregious political conduct, and it's done in a way where it's clearly outside the bounds of what's normal, then I think, there is a case for impeachment. So, he's not wrong in what he's saying. Of course, you shouldn't be impeaching judges because you don't like their decisions. That's not how the system works. But when you look at decisions that are overstepping the structural bounds of the judiciary, then all of a sudden you have a case. And so that is why you have to pick the right moment to do it. You have to find them at their most egregious. It's the worst kind of overreach, and then you come in for the kill there to have your best chance moving forward when you get to the Supreme Court.
But let's just look at the conversations that we're having today, right? This is a good conversation to have. This is a high-level intellectual conversation about how should we be going forward? Should these judges be impeached? Should they not? The conversation that we had yesterday with Mike Howell from the Oversight Project was talking about an auto pen with Joe Biden.
Yes.
Where do we know if the president of the United States was actually making decisions on his own? And now the conversation is like, okay, how are we actually going to go through and govern the country at a proper level in a proper way versus auto pen.
So in both these cases, they're similar. Roberts' response into impeachment is similar to the normie response to the auto pen. It's, oh no, this was signed. This makes me uncomfortable to talk about. Normally, you wouldn't go back and say that these things are invalid. The president signed them, and auto pen, I don't know, and they just kind of go off. They don't like it because it makes them uncomfortable, right? Because what needs to be proven is this is something outside the pale. This is not normal. There are rules. There are norms. Let's look at our rules and norms. And the rules and norms are not supposed to be that judges go way outside the bounds of their constitutional authority and overrule the president of the United States when it comes to sending dangerous terrorists, back to another country. That's the real norm. You could basically describe this as it makes them uncomfortable, right? Look, I don't want it to be the case that an auto pen was used in a way that is illicit and renders the statements of the president invalid, EOs or pardoning. That is awkward, right? But deal with it. We live in an awkward time, and that's a lot of that's the never Trump problem too, right? Oh, this makes me uncomfortable. We do things a certain way, and yada yada. But really, the certain way, the norm, is what you need to look at closely. What they really want to do is not be bothered, just like anyone else in their job, because it's going to be controversial and it's going to be uncomfortable for them. So what we need to stick to is the reality. When are the judges actually going way beyond the bounds of their constitutional authority and attack them for that and stick to it, just like Stephen Miller did on CNN? Please, Stephen, come on other networks that are actually friendly and reporting the news. That'd be great. And also when it comes to the auto pen, we don't want to get off this. If it's really the case that he was signing the pardons with an auto pen, and we can't determine that he was in the right state of mind, then those are invalid. And it doesn't matter how uncomfortable it makes people in Washington, D.C.
The fact that we are actually having these conversations now, though, makes me so much happier than what we were dealing with Joe Biden as the president. I think we can all agree on that one. Don't go anywhere, because when we come back, Marty Bent will explain Trump's moves to make cryptocurrencies great again. Coming up. Donald Trump is going all in on crypto. In his second term, he's making good on his campaign promise to turn the United States into the crypto capital of the planet and a Bitcoin superpower. With big moves on regulation and innovation, it looks like crypto is about to take center stage in America's financial future. So here to discuss is Marty Bent. He's the managing partner of 1031 VC. So Marty, thanks so much for your time once again. What do you make of where we are right now with this crypto landscape in the United States?
Well, Jill, Matthew, it is in a much better spot compared to where it was when I last spoke to you, when Biden was still in office. And it seems like right now we're in the process of getting regulatory clarity on a few things. As you mentioned, number one is stable coins. You have the Stable Act and the Genius Act being discussed right now. Second, you have market structure. How are these assets going to be defined? Whether or not they're going to be regulated by the CFTC or the SEC. And then last, but certainly not least, the conversation around the strategic Bitcoin reserve and how the U.S. government is going to accumulate Bitcoin over time.
So, looking at those three things, what do you want to see from the administration moving forward? First off, we do have to double acknowledge what you just said. It's a different universe that we're living in right now. The fact that there is a czar, I was sort of in disbelief. Just these things are actually happening. It was like when Trump went to the conference. So promises made, promises kept, it looks like so far in terms of moving forward. But go through what you want to see in the future from the administration on these fronts.
Well, I think what I care most about as a Bitcoiner specifically, stable coins are certainly interesting. They found product market fit in terms of enabling individuals around the world to access alternative financial rails and access dollar instruments where in places where they don't have bank accounts. But I think the real signal is on the strategic Bitcoin reserve. And I think one thing that I'm looking forward to is that getting enshrined into law. Right now, we have the executive order. And as we've seen with executive orders from administration to administration, they can be rendered moot if the other side of the aisle gets into office in 2028. And so enshrining the strategic Bitcoin reserve into law is my number one priority. And I think the way it's laid out in the Lummis bill is great for two reasons. Number one, it says Bitcoin is an asset worth holding, and we're going to try to accumulate as much as possible in an attempt to defease the national debt, which has gotten out of control. And just as importantly, but not really talked about as much, is the right to self-custody Bitcoin as an individual and be able to use Bitcoin as a day-to-day currency as an individual in a peer-to-peer fashion. So I think those two things, accumulating Bitcoin with the intent of defeasing the national debt, which has gotten out of control, and enshrining the rights of individuals to hold and send Bitcoin without having to use a centralized third party, would be massive for the country.
Yeah, and what do you think? What are the biggest obstacles to that? Do you think both those things are going to be smooth sailing? Does it look like strategic reserve and the actual right to use this stuff is going to happen?
I think so. I mean, when it comes to self-custody and being able to use Bitcoin, that would just be enshrining what has already existed in the country to date. People have been using Bitcoin in a peer-to-peer fashion, securing it themselves since the protocol launched in 2009. And under the Biden administration, there were worries that laws were going to be passed that would make it so you would have to use a centralized third party to access Bitcoin. So if the Trump admin is able to enshrine the right to self-custody into law, that would be incredible. And then in terms of the government acquiring a strategic reserve, I think the one thing that is being discussed right now behind the scenes and broadly in the public is how is the government actually going to acquire this Bitcoin? And there are many creative ideas. One that I'm interested in was presented by Andrew Hones from Battery Finance at an event co-hosted by Senator Lummis and the Bitcoin Policy Institute last week, which is this idea of bit bonds, where you can issue longer duration bonds, specifically 10-year bonds, and use a portion of the cash proceeds from those bond sales to buy Bitcoin with 10% of that cash. That allows you to offer a 10-year treasury with a lower yield, which would help Americans in the sense that it would help bring down mortgage costs, auto loan cost, credit card loan cost, and it would help us roll over debt at a lower interest rate so we can begin lowering the interest expense on the debt. So long-winded way of saying, how are we going to acquire it in a way in which taxpayers aren't paying taxes to acquire this Bitcoin? What is a budget-neutral fashion to do this? And I think bit bonds is an interesting idea. And then, of course, there are other discussions happening about revaluing the gold that the Treasury holds with the Federal Reserve, potentially selling some land owned by the government to acquire Bitcoin, and other creative ideas. And so I think, again, to reiterate, it is a drastically different landscape compared to where we were when we last spoke last year.
It is absolutely drastically different. I want to know, because you've been in the Bitcoin world for so long, what it was like for you just to go through and see the White House hosting a crypto summit, right? Like guys like Michael Saylor, Brian Armstrong, Brad Garlinghouse, all these guys there just gathering together at the White House to just go through and talk about crypto, and just to do it on the national stage the way that they did. What's that like, just seeing where, Bitcoin has come from to where it is right now?
It's an incredible breath of fresh air. And to me, it's finally a moment where it's like, okay, sanity has entered the conversation. And it is becoming bipartisan too. At this event I was at last week in DC, Ro Khanna from the Democratic side of the aisle came and he spoke about why he's supporting Bitcoin. I think the way he actually laid it out was very nonchalant and very straight to the point, which is Bitcoin is just technology. And for some reason or another, over the first 15 years of Bitcoin's existence, it has sort of been, and it actually sort of makes sense. It's this nation alien technology that confuses a lot of people. The people that are supportive of Bitcoin and pushing Bitcoin can sometimes be bombastic. However, it is just a technology that the U.S. should be harnessing and leveraging to increase the quality of life for individual Americans and the quality of services provided by the federal government. And again, it's just a breath of fresh air. We're finally at a point where it's okay, we can acknowledge that Bitcoin exists. It's here to stay. With that in mind, how are we going to make sure that American citizens are benefiting from Bitcoin proliferating? And that's the other key point. I think I said this last year. America has the lead when it comes to Bitcoin. The number of businesses focused on Bitcoin starting in the United States is immense. I think we lead the world in terms of business creation here. The amount of Bitcoin held by individual Americans on a per capita basis leads the world. Bitcoin, we have the most mining hash rate here in the United States borders. Bitcoin is the US's game to lose. And I think now that we're finally having adult conversations about what this is, how we're integrating it into the economy and enshrining the rights of individuals to use this technology is long overdue. And it's just incredibly relieving, especially considering the attacks that the industry was getting from the Biden administration.
Yeah, night and day. We talk about this stuff all the time here. But we should have you look into the camera and just explain briefly the reason for the strategic reserve, in your mind and its importance, and also, squash any of the objections out there to it.
Put simply, the strategic reserve, its reason for existence is the U.S. is the most powerful nation in the world, and that nation should be holding the scarcest asset, the best store of value asset that has ever existed. And we have a unique opportunity, considering where Bitcoin is in its adoption phase, to be one of the first to adopt this reserve asset. And that gives you an incredible advantage. There's only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoin, and those who adopt Bitcoin first are going to benefit the most as it monetizes over time. And going back to the runaway debt, that is why I personally think the government should adopt Bitcoin, is because that debt situation is getting out of hand, and you need to think creatively to solve that long-term debt issue. And I think Bitcoin is literally the only creative solution that exists to defease the debt over time. And I want to be clear, I'm saying all this as a Bitcoiner, and I want to be clear that Bitcoin doesn't need the U.S. government to succeed. It's going to succeed on its own merits. The government can decide to adopt it or not. But I do think if the government's looking at this big problem that it has in terms of the debt, Bitcoin is the only creative solution that can help defease that problem over time.
Yeah, Marty, from conversations that we've had before, I think that we all know that we don't trust the system that the government has put out there. And I know Elon Musk is out there as well. He was actually on Ted Cruz's podcast, The Verdict, dropping bombshells. Let's go ahead and watch that.
I call a magic money computer any computer which can just make money out of thin air. That's magic money.
So how does that work?
It just issues payments.
And you said there's something like 11 of these computers at Treasury that are sending out trillions in payments?
They're mostly at Treasury. There's some at HHS, there's one or two at State, there's some at DOD. I think we found now 14 magic money computers.
14, okay.
They just send money out of nothing.
Right. And this is something that we've known to be true, like without knowing the details of everything, as Elon calls them, the magic money computers. Okay, now we know there are 14 of them that have been just going through and performing various tasks over time. It's a crazy world that we live in right now, that we have Elon Musk going on a podcast with Ted Cruz, who is a Bitcoiner as well. He buys some every month. He's told me before in the past that we get all of this information now. And oh yeah, by the way, everything that we thought was true kind of going on behind the scenes. Okay, yeah, complete validation, Marty.
It is. And this is why Bitcoin exists. Satoshi said this explicitly in the early days when he's still around. Governments and central banks cannot be trusted to manage the currency, because time and time again throughout history, whether it's in ancient times or more recent times, if you have the ability to press the big red button of money creation, it's going to happen. And that's what Bitcoin does. It removes the ability by these central authorities, or anybody for that matter, to press that big red button, that magic money button that existed in 14 computers across different government agencies. And for the longest time, we haven't been able to audit directly as individuals the monetary systems that we're forced to live under until Bitcoin. And so now, in a world in which Bitcoin exists, there is no reason that we need to trust the government with their magic money computers and have a situation where it takes Donald Trump getting into the White House for a second time and bringing Elon with him to go and physically audit what these agencies are doing. Anybody who has the ability to download software on their computer can audit the monetary system whenever they want to via Bitcoin. So it's an incredible innovation, and I couldn't be more excited about where we are today and how this administration is posturing in terms of their willingness and eagerness to embrace Bitcoin.
You love how much the administration is embracing Bitcoin, but now there are others that are also coming along and joining them and the White House. And, you know, we were talking about some of the other stable coins and whatnot earlier, and the other people that were attending the White House Crypto Summit. You're not fans of everyone that was there. I know this for a fact. I've seen you tweet about Brad Garlinghouse and XRP and the like earlier. So you're okay with everybody embracing Bitcoin, just not the rest of the kids in the sandbox.
I'm a fan of free markets. I like free markets, and I would prefer that. I would prefer the ability to compete with the Brad Garlinghouses, the Ripples, the Cardanos, the Solanas, the Ethereums, whatever. I'm happy that they're all getting their time too, because at the end of the day, I do think the merits of Bitcoin stand on their own, and people will come to realize, as many already have. Many people's path to Bitcoin starts with a journey, getting into something like Ripple or Cardano or Ethereum and saying, oh, this is a better Bitcoin. I'm going to get on this because it's cheaper, and I want to ride the wave that Bitcoin did. But ultimately, they come to realize that Bitcoin is completely different from all those other cryptocurrencies, because Bitcoin is unique in the sense that it is truly distributed, truly decentralized, had a quasi-immaculate conception, and every other cryptocurrency that's ever existed since Bitcoin has a founder, a founding team, a corporation above it. And whether it's Ripple, Cardano, Ethereum, Solana, those were all pre-mined altcoins that are enriching the early founders. And over time, people begin to naturally recognize that the dynamics that exist in those markets simply do not exist in Bitcoin. Bitcoin is much fairer, much more open, much more transparent. And while these people are in the White House and they're probably putting bad ideas in the administration's ears, I do think that over time people will recognize that Bitcoin is where the signal is. And we're already beginning to see that in the free market. And this is being expressed in the market cap of Bitcoin compared to every other cryptocurrency, which is beginning to detach.
So you would say with XRP, you would say, look, this is a corporation that exists to make money, no matter what people say about it changing the system.
Yeah, I mean, the Ripple Foundation, they've only ever sold XRP. They created billions of XRP out of the ether, pun intended. And the owners of Ripple have never bought Ripple themselves. They created it and they've only sold it to the market. They do not believe in that. That action tells you that they inherently do not believe in the technology that they're building. They believe it's an incredible liquidity mechanism to dump on retail. And a lot of these other cryptocurrencies, that is what they do. They found an easy money. It's funny because it's a lot of what we're trying to get away from. They found a way to hit a button, create money out of thin air, and then sell it onto unsuspecting retail investors, and that has worked out well for them. And I think they're getting into these rooms in the White House because they have given significant donations to many campaigns and PACs over the years leading up to this new Trump presidency, and that's how the game's played. Even though these people are in the rooms with the president and his advisors, again, I think the merits of Bitcoin compared to everything else are beginning to stand out to such a degree where it is inarguable that it doesn't make sense to really support these things.
Well, Marty, thanks for having some fun with us at the end. I do read what you post on X, so we just had to go there for a little while with you, but always great stuff.
Jill, Matthew, I'm happy to do this anytime. Thank you.
All right. We'll come back with Americans. Are they actually willing to pay more for products that are made in America? We'll have your answers right after this. Well, there's pretty much not a day that goes by on this show where we're not talking about tariffs and American products versus foreign products. So today on X, with that in mind, I asked you, are you willing to pay more for products that are made in America? And look at these results. Yes, it's important. 93% of people, no, give me cheaper stuff. 6%. So, Matthew, when I look at this, it's very clear. This is not one where we're having to really decipher what the audience is trying to say. Look,
for decades, all I heard growing up was globalism is good. from the right, from our friends, from conservatives. It's all good because the cost of goods goes down. And of course, that is good. It is good if things cost less. That's good. But no one was talking about the real cost of goods going down, right? Which is not just indentured servants and slave camps in China, but also the destruction of the American workforce and manufacturing base. And that was supposed to be somehow an illegitimate argument. I think this poll shows people get it. They know they're willing to pay more for things if they are made in America and they're actually helping the economy. They'd rather do that because it should be a better quality product as well, right? And that's what we should be striving for. You can't just say like, oh, the American workers suck, so whatever. Well, then make them better. Like, if our people don't know how to do this, then teach them how. That's your job, right? And I think everyone gets it now, and it's heartening to see.
That's what they're saying in the replies. Let's get to Mills first. He said, if we normalize Made in America, yeah, it'll be more expensive to start. But if we keep it going and allow domestic manufacturers to increase production and bring prices down, more product usually translates into cheaper prices.
Hey, yeah. More expensive to start is exactly right. This is going to take time, but over time, there will be some savings. Absolutely.
Doug says, I assume that American-made products are much higher quality. Would you rather have a Toyota made in Kentucky or a Chevy made in Mexico? It's a good question because we do see some of these, products that were thought to be foreign, but now they're all made here in America. There's so many out there.
Yeah.
Car industry is a great example of this.
Yeah, for a Toyota, that is a good example. Honda, they make a lot of cars here. They have a lot of manufacturing here. Of course, that is a hard case to make with them because they've made good cars for a while, right? But they are making things here, and that's Trump's point, right? Trump's point is you can make things other places, but we're going to throw the tariff on it. You want to make it here? That's fine. That's great. We welcome that.
David will round it out today for us. He said, I think this needs to be a speech made by Trump that, yes, we are giving production back to the U.S., meaning more jobs and self-reliance, but it comes with a higher cost initially. Once things normalize, the U.S. gets back in charge of ourselves, the pain will subside. So everybody's kind of on board today, which is not usual in the comment section. I can tell you that much.
No, I think it shows that our audience and the base on the right understands, that this is going to take time, but everyone's willing to do it. And for a lot of people, it was COVID. When you see that you can't make aspirin here, you go, this has to change. We can't just be buying the cheapest crap from wherever, made God knows how by God knows who. And if it actually helps your fellow citizens, we're happy to do it. So it will, like everyone realizes, it will take time to transition, but we're committed. I love it.
The other thing that our audience understands is the border and making sure that things go well there. And I know that you name-checked Stephen Miller earlier on today's show, so let's go ahead and take a look at him on CNN earlier.
I'm going to have to let you go. Democrats defending trained Irwagwa instead of celebrating President Trump expelling these terrorists from our midst. And I'm glad for the opportunity to explain how the separation of powers does work. If the president has to litigate every national security action with 700 district court judges, then we don't have a functioning democracy.
I love this clip because I could teach a class off of the class that Stephen Miller gave that woman at CNN in a couple different directions. One, it's an example of how to deal with the media, but two, and what I want to focus on, it's an example of doing politics right. Let me count the ways here. First off, the Trump administration picked the best case. The first, one of the first big things they did when it comes to immigration is to go after the real gangsters, the real bad guys, the real murderers, a gang that is responsible for heinous crimes, right? And they went after them, and we're going to deport them, and we are going to forcibly get them the hell out of here. There's no one who in their heart of hearts doesn't want that to happen. There's no one who wants these people living next to them. And they did it on the basis of a law that is old, that is tried and tested in the courts, and they understood, right, the parameters of every aspect of it. This is important because the left is going to come after you 6 ways from Sunday, however they can, to try to pull out this is unconstitutional and there was no due process. So there's a couple of things going on here. One is the law that he's referring to talks about it's a predatory incursion. So an invasion, right, is happening, but you could say, well, is it really a straight up military invasion? And or what exactly is it? And Miller says two things. He says, well, it is an invasion. It's literally foreigners who are murderers coming into our country and invading it, right? And the government has supported this of Venezuela. The government is supportive of moving these people out, and that's documented in what the administration put together when they made the argument for this. And then also, this is obviously a predatory incursion. In other words, people coming in to cause harm of any style. So and if that happens, right, then the president has authority to get them the hell out of here. That's in statutory law. But the basis of that is that the president has to be the one to determine whether or not something is a threat and to respond to it. This goes deep, embedded into the Constitution when you give all the executive powers to one guy, the POTUS. And so the way that Miller is able to school her is because he is sitting on an example that she's just completely wrong or ignorant about, a little bit of both. She has no idea what she's talking about. And the administration set this up where all the ducks are in a row. All the ducks are in a row. Even though Roberts and others might be afraid, it is inconceivable to me that anyone with a brain, and granted there's only a few of them on the court, whether they're squishy or not, could actually say this was a problem. This is literally the president's job. This is what the president exists to do. And it's a great example to the rest of the country, the problem of the judges, because as he says, of course, you couldn't have district judges making this determination for us. We don't elect them to decide randomly who we need to deport because they're invading us or threatening us from foreign nations.
And legacy media, this is a great example of that. Axios, this is what we would have had to deal with in the past. Axios is saying the White House ignored a court order for the planes, right? They wanted to go through that. Well, JD Vance and others, right? We're giving love to Stephen Miller. JD Vance went out there on X and said there were violent criminals and rapists in our country. Democrats fought to keep them here. Donald Trump deported them. This is a new day for Republicans to get out in front of stories like Stephen Miller is doing against CNN, like JD Vance is doing in many of his speeches, and here in this particular instance on X. This is not the Republican Party of old, and I am so thankful that we actually have people on our side that are willing to stand up and just say, this is a very easy side to take. They were rapists and murderers in our country. We don't want them here anymore.
Yes, and exactly, Jill. And the thing is, it's not just common sense to get rid of rapists and murderers. It's also constitutional. And what they're utilizing is the Constitution, even if they have to explain that to midwits and less over at CNN. And that's what's beautiful about this. It's a constitutional educational lesson. It explains the nature of executive power versus judicial. And I think these judges are in a lot of trouble because people are just spouting out the straight truth now.
And you don't have to rely on legacy media anymore. That's the best part about it. So we appreciate you watching The Mandate every single night because we're trying to make a little difference here in a great big media landscape. So thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you back here tomorrow night.